Today's daf we're going to learn is Pesachim daf Pe'alef. Today's daf is sponsored by Carol Robinson and Art Gould in memory of Art's mother Shirley, Sarah Bat Avraham V'zicharecha. Today is her 7th year at site. She was a lifelong learner and a striver, a woman born before her time. Once her 3 children were old enough, she went back to school, earned a master's degree, as well as publishing 4 books on raising a family. Okay, we're going to start with our daf. Today's daf is a little bit complicated. There's a bunch of new concepts or concepts we've seen, but are a little bit harder to follow. So patience. And as I said, we have another about maybe, I can't exactly, but about 18 days till we get to our Pesachim. So 18 days and counting. I know sometimes we end up with a set of dapim that are quite complicated, but we always know that at the end you get to other things. And even in today's daf, there's a little bit of a nice ending to the daf with a little bit of an interesting idea. So hang in there till we get there. Okay, we started yesterday with a question from Nitma Tumatahom, about 20 lines from the bottom. Rami Barhama asked the question, Kohen, we had this idea that Tumat Tahom, if there's a grave, which we're going to learn a little bit more about today, that was unknown, okay, there was no way you could have known about it, you became Tameh, you brought the Korban Pesach anyway, we'll see at which point you found out, okay, that will come up later, but it's a heter that if you did the Korban Pesach with this Tumat Tahom, it's allowed, both for Nazir, even though he theoretically became Tameh Lamet, and for, right, which he's not allowed to do, usually that cancels his Nizirut if he became impure to a dead body, and also for Pesach, which usually it's not allowed, we're going to permit it. They learned this from a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So now the question is this only for the owners of the sacrifice, or is it also relevant to the Kohen who's sacrificing it? So to answer the question, Rava brought a Braita, which at the very end, toward the end of today's stuff, we're going to see the Braita in its entirety. Today, we're going to quote different parts of it, and eventually we're going to see the entire thing. He says, Lo amru tumat tahom ela lamet bilvad. Only for a mate. They say, what does that come to exclude? What else could it be a tumat tahom of? They say it must be tumat tahom of sheretz. If it's tumat tahom of sheretz, well, that's not relevant to the owners, not relevant to Nazir at all, because there's no tumat sheretz, and not to the owners of Korban Pesach, because we already learned that there's an opinion that says, shochatim v'zorchakin al tameh sheretz. Even if you're a tameh sheretz, we could still do the Korban Pesach for you. So then it wouldn't be a problem for Pesach at all. So you wouldn't need a special line to teach you this Braita to say, well, Tumat Tahom is only for this and not for that, because even regular Tumat Sheretz is not a problem in a Korban Pesach, at least if you hold Shochatim V'Zorkin al Pesach, al Tumat Sheretz. So then Rav Yosef said, all right, and then it's coming to exclude Tumat Sheretz of who? Well, not the owner, because that we know you can do. It must be Tumat Sheretz of the Kohen, and from there you get your answer. It's also relevant to the Kohen, because if we're saying it's only Tumat Tahom here and not there, well, it must be only Tumat Tahom for a Kohen in the Pesach, but not a Tumat Sheretz, right? Only for Tumat Meit, but not Tumat Sheretz of a Kohen. If he had no idea there was a Sheretz there and he became Tameh to it, it would mess him up, okay? That's what they assume. That's what Rav assumes. But Rav Yosef says, no, you could say it's talking about the Baalim, the owners, and it is about Pesach. And what's it coming to say? If there was a Tumat Tahom of Ziva. So I specifically didn't explain this yesterday. We're going to start explaining right now. What is Tumat Tahom of Ziva? Okay, it's not coming to exclude Tumat Tahom of Sheretz, which would then say definitely the Kohen. It could be talking about the owner exclusively, which means you can't necessarily assume it applies to the Kohen. And talking about to exclude a case where he didn't know that there was going to be a Zav discharge. Okay, now what would be that case? So it's a case where either, okay, the person who's a Zav, it's a disease called gonorrhea, he has discharges. Once he sees 2 or 3, I mean, we'll see 3 is a more chamor din that you have to bring a korban, but once he sees already 2 times, then already he has to wait 7 clean days. So what would be a tumat tahom? It would be a case where he gets to day number 7. Now, the anida, a menstruating woman, goes to the mikveh at night after her 7 days are over. But zav and a zava go, like all other people who are tmeim, go to the mikveh. The nida and a woman who gives birth are exceptions to the rule. But everyone else goes to the mikveh in the morning. So the morning of day number 7, the man goes to the mikveh. And then what happens? He ends up seeing a discharge that day. That's what we call Tumat Tahom of Ziva, because he had no expectation that there was going to be, he had already 6 clean days. He assumes day number 7 also was clean. And then all of a sudden he sees a riyah. That's Tumat Tahom of Ziva. And that's what we're going to say is not permitted. Okay. That's what we're saying. Tumat Tahom only works by mate and not by Tumat Ziva. So now the Gemara is going to have a whole long question on this based on the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. And they're going to say, Tumat tahom deziva lo meratzeh. Wait, it doesn't work? Tumat tahom of ziva isn't accepted? It is accepted, but tzitz is meratzeh. How do we know this? Because it's Hatanya Rabbi Yossi Omer. In the Breita it says, the Rabbi Yossi says, Shomeret yom keneged yom. Okay, like I said, we have to explain a whole bunch of concepts. What's a shomeret yom keneged yom? Just like there's a zav, there's a zava. Okay, they're different. The zav is a clear discharge. The woman is a bloody discharge. For a woman, she's a zava when she has bleeding. That's not the time of her period or beyond her 7 days of her period. So now she has this blood. The first day she sees blood, what is she called? She's called a shomeret yom keneged yom. That means the next day, if she hasn't seen blood on day number 2 yet, in the morning, she goes to the mikvah. She watches that whole day to see if she's going to bleed or not. If no blood, there's no blood. She's pure at nighttime, okay, like regular classic tumah. If she sees blood on day number 2 also, she does the same thing. That's what's called shomeret yom keneged yom. For every day she sees blood, she waits the next day, 1 day. If she doesn't see blood on day number 3, she's gone to the mikvah in the morning, there's no blood the rest of the day, she's fine. By the nighttime, she's pure. If she sees 3 days in a row, she becomes a zava gedola. And then she has to wait 7 clean days. That's where we get 7 clean days for nowadays, because women in the Torah, Nida was only 7 days, including the days you're bleeding. Zava is additional 7 days. Because women confuse, I'm telling this in a very nutshell, okay? There's a little more to it than that. But because it was concern for confusion, they basically said all women are safek zavot. Maybe they're a zava, and they always have to wait 7 clean days. So now, what happens? Rabbi Yossi says, Shomeret yom keneged yom, sheshachatu v'zarku aleha. What happened? She went to the mikvah on her 2nd day. Okay, she saw blood on day number 1, which was Yud Gimel Nisan. Yud Daled Nisan in the morning, she goes to the mikvah. They slaughter a Korban Pesach for her, and they sprinkle the blood. We're done. Then what happens? So zarku aleha b'sheni shela on her 2nd day. V'achar kach ra'ata. Okay, so then she sees blood. So now she's impure, right? So she can't eat the Korban Pesach because she's impure. Eina ochelet, but ptura milaso Pesach Sheni. Now, why is she exempt from Pesach Sheni? First of all, this whole question, why do you even have to say she's exempt from Pesach Sheni? Didn't we say that women aren't chayava in Pesach Sheni? That's a side question. I'm not going to answer that. But what they're saying is, let's say, right, maybe they didn't hold that way. Maybe he didn't hold that women are exempt. But anyway, right now, we're just going to take it at face value. Well, his point is when he says she's exempt from Pesach Sheni, what he really means to say, and maybe this is why it doesn't matter if she isn't exempt, if she doesn't even have to do Pesach Sheni, the point is she fulfilled her Pesach Rishon. This is considered fulfillment of the mitzvah. Now, what should that imply? My time, and now this is a classic case of, again, it's a little bit weird to call it Tumat Tahom, but they call this Tumat Tahom of Ziva, because she had, now, you might say it's a little bit weird to call this Tumat Tahom. She did have some thinking that maybe she'd have blood because she had blood yesterday, but this is what they call Tumat Tahom of Zava. There is no really other case of Tumat Tahom. It wasn't expected. She already went to the mikvah, right? And it's this blood that we didn't know where it came from kind of thing. So is it not now? So if you have Tumat Tahom of Zava, and what did we say? There is no Tumat, right? That line, it's only Tumat Tahom of a mate and not of what Rav Yosef tried to fill in the blank, not of Tumat Tahom of Zava, in order to reject Rava's answer, which was, it's saying, and not sheretz, right? Because then we would know the answer to the Kohen. He suggests maybe it's saying, not Tumat Tahom of Zava. That wouldn't work. Well, now, what do you see here? According to Rabbi Yossi, it does work, because is it lav nishum miratzet tzitz? It must be. The tzitz atones for the fact that she brought this korban, even though she was tmeah. She didn't know she was tmeah. This is Tumat Tahom of Zava, and it seems to work. So they say, don't be bothered by Rabbi Yossi. It doesn't work because the tzitz is meratzeh. And now comes something a little bit strange to think about, but he says, and this is the way they explain Rabbi Yossi's approach, which is a bit of a unique approach. Lo mishum de kasav Rabbi Yossi mikanu lahabahi mitama. Rabbi Yossi holds that when she goes to the mikveh and then sees blood on her day number 2, or for all intents and purposes, it could be day number 3, or it could be the zav on his day number 7, or a zav on her day number 7, and she sees blood after she goes to the mikveh, that blood is disconnected from the previous blood. Okay, now I know you're thinking, well, then how can you ever become a Zava Gedola? At the very end of this section, we're going to ask that question. Okay, but what he views is, this is like a new tumah. It's mikano lahaba. It's from here. We don't go backwards with this. This is something new because she already went to the mikveh. And that's why it works by Korban Pesach, not because of any sort of Tumat Tahom of Zava. This is it's based on a different rule, which is when she bleeds, right? She bled, then she went to the mikveh in the morning. It's true she has to wait till nighttime to be fully tahor, but she's basically tahor. When we see this blood coming, right? This blood that comes later, that's a new tumah. Now it makes her tameh from the beginning. Okay, so therefore it doesn't mess up that those few hours in between where she went in the morning and then did her Korban Pesach in the afternoon, and then later in the afternoon she saw blood. That new blood is not connected to the previous. Okay, that's what they assume, which basically, in the end, what it basically shows, it's a little bit tricky to how to understand the flow here, because they're using this to question Rav Yosef, how you could say that it rejects Tumatom of Ziva, right? Tumatom of Zava is lo meratza. It is meratza. Look at this case. And then we say it's not because the tzitz is meratza on it. It's because this isn't real. What he's really saying in the end is this isn't really Tumatom of Ziva. Okay? And then you can't use Rabbi Yossi to question Rav Yosef. In the end, we're going to have to ask, and I'm kind of giving you the whole picture so that you understand where we're going. In the end, we're going to say, well, according to Rabbi Yossi, then what's that line coming to exclude? If it's according to Rabbi Yossi, there's no such thing as Tumat Zava. We tried to bring this opinion of Rabbi Yossi to reject Rabbi Yosef, but in the end we say, no, it's just that Rabbi Yossi has a unique approach to it. It's not that he thinks the tzitz atones for it. If the tzitz atoned for it, then we really wouldn't, then Tumatom, he would be wrong, that Lemeute Tumatom of Ziva isn't true. But in the end, it's because Rabbi Yossi has a different approach, and therefore it doesn't contradict Rabbi Yosef. But in the end, we're going to say, according to Rabbi Yossi, though, how does he understand the whole question that we started with? We'll get back to that soon. But now they want to really check. Is it true that Rabbi Yossi holds the mikanu l'haba? We're going to bring a braita that seems to contradict that. V'hatanya, doesn't it say in a braita? Rabbi Yossi omer, zav ba'al shtei re'iyot. That's a zav who sees 2 times. Remember what happens? He's a zav gadol. He now needs 7 clean days. Sheshachatov zavku alav b'shvi'i shelo. Okay, so on day number 7, again, this is the exact same case, right? Day number 7, he goes to the mikveh in the morning, and then they did his korban pesach for him. And then achar kach ra'ah, you can already see where this is going, right? Then he sees another re'iyah, he has a discharge. And likewise, v'chein shomeret yom keneged yom. By the way, this could be a zava also, but they're giving the case where it's a little bit different. The shomeret yom keneged yom. Sheshachatuv zarku alav b'sheni shela, the same case we saw before. V'achar kach ra'ata. Now, what would you expect to see according to Rabbi Yossi? This is fine. The korban pesach is fine. And any tumah, we're not going to go retroactively when it comes to the tumah. We're only going forward because we're viewing this as something separate. So let's see what he says. Let's start from the second one. The second one matches perfectly. It says they don't have to do Pesach Sheni. They've been Yotzei, they're Korban Pesach Rishon. They fulfill their obligation because, right, it's fine. But now, what did we try to say? First, we said it's because the tzitz atones. We said, no, it's not because of that. It's because he thinks that this is a new thing. Well, if it's a new thing, then mishkav u'moshav l'mafreya doesn't make sense. That means anything she sat on that day, from the time she went to the mikvah until now, is all going to be tameh. If she sat on something, she lied on something. All the tumah of this zava woman or a zav, all those tumot, if he sat on something, that's going to be tameh because it goes retroactively. So this seems to go against the way we explain Rav Yosef, that it's not because the tzitz atones, it's because there's a whole new tumah. And really, in between that time, she was 100% Torah. She wasn't 100% Torah according to this, and this is Rabbi Yossi also. So, Amre Maile Mafreya Midarabanan. With the fact that he says it goes retroactive, that's just a rabbinic chumrah, but it's not really from Torah law. From Torah law, it's totally fine. And that's why the Pesach works, not because the tzitz atones, but because she was 100% pure. Yes, the rabbi said this looks a little weird, so let's just, retroactively make all the stuff that she sat on, lied on, the he also sat, lied, whatever, zav. Let's make it tameh, but that's only rabbinic and it doesn't mess us up. And we're going to further prove that. Va'af Rabbi Yoshaya savar mitameh lemafreya midrabanan. Rabbi Yoshaya also held, now it's not that he himself held, Rabbi Yoshaya is an Emora from Eretz Yisrael. He held that Rabbi Yossi, when he was mitameh lemafreya, did it on a rabbinic level only. How do we know this? We're going to have a little bit of a discussion before we get to the conclusion, how we get to it. Ditanya, this word ditanya is incorrect. Ditanya means we learn in a braita, and now we're going to see a machloka between Rabbi Yoshaya and Rabbi Yochanan, who are both Emoraim. So it must be de'amal and not ditanya. It's a mistake. As it says, Rabbi Yoshaya omer, aval zav shera'a b'shvi'i shelo, soter et shelefanav. Rabbi Yoshaya himself said, if a zav sees on day number 7, it cancels all his 7 clean days, right? This is like a nida. If you see blood on one of the days, doesn't matter what day, you have to start from the beginning. So that's what Rabbi Yoshaya says. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, Lo yistor ela yomo. If the zav sees a discharge on day number 7, he skips day number 7, and day number 8 becomes his day number 7. In other words, you just have to take that off the count. To which Rabbi Yoshaya says, what are you talking about? Either way you look at it, what you're saying makes no sense. Now, on day number 7, what happened? He went to the mikveh in the morning, and then he had a discharge. So if you're going to say that this goes back and messes him up from before, it's as if it was a continuum. Well, then afilu kulu nistor. Then you should hold like me that he has to start from the beginning because you need 7 straight clean days. And if you think this is something new, well, then yomo nami lo nistor, then it shouldn't mess up his day. Now with the zav, what happens basically? If you count it as something new, then today his 7 days are over. He went to the mikveh in the morning. He's done with those 7 clean days. Now he's like a zav who sees only once because he saw one time that day. And if you see one time, what happens? You go to the mikveh that day and you're fine. So basically, he just have to go to the mikveh twice that day. He'd have to go after he saw the second time, after he saw the one time that day on day number 7, and he'd be fine. So Rabbi Yochanan, that's not what you said. You said have him wait another day. There's no reason for that. So it makes no sense what you're saying. Therefore, Rabbi Yoshaya says, Ela ema, it must be that what you meant to say was lo yistor v'lo yomo. It doesn't even contradict that day. And it doesn't even mess up that day because he could just go to the mikveh again and be fine. Okay, so now, here comes the important part. This had nothing to do with Rabbi Yossi yet. But now he says, V'amar le Rabbi Yossi kai kapatech. He says, Rabbi Yossi holds like you, by the way, which is mikanu lehaba, right? So then they say, V'ha Rabbi Yossi amar mitamim mishkavu moshav lemafreya. But doesn't he say we go retroactively when it comes to whatever you sat on that day is going to be tameh? Elalav shmamina mitameh lemafreya midurabanan shmamina. So it must be Rabbi Yoshaya held that was on the Doraita level and that was on the Rabbanan level, right on the Doraita level. This is viewed as something new. And that's why I said to Rabbi Yochanan, when you view that 7th Re'iyah as something new, you must be holding like Rabbi Yossi, who holds it's really something new. Why did he hold the Mafreya? Because that's the Rabbanan. Okay, so now we get back to our topic, which is Le Rabbi Yossi, Hashda Amar Mikanu Lahabao Mitameh, Lemepe Vadami Utemai. If he says that Tuma, now let's put it into the terminology that the Gemara used originally. We had this line of the Braita of Rabbi Chia, which said, Tuma lo amru Tuma tahom ela lemeit bilvad, which came to exclude something, right? Rava said it came to exclude sheretz and meant also kohanim. Rabbi Yosef said it meant to exclude Tuma tahom of ziva, which then we questioned and we said, right, doesn't Rabbi Yossi say that, right? We wanted to say that the Tzitzis Mirat said that it does take care of Tumat Tahom, and it's not excluded from this halacha, to which we answered, no, Rabbi Yossi has this unique approach. But now we want to go, so Rabbi Yosef's answer stands, because we could just say it doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi. But now we're saying, according to Rabbi Yossi, that there's no such thing as Tumat Tahom of Zava, because it's a new thing. It's not considered, right, it goes retroactive on a Torah level. So if that's the case, then what's this line? So let's just read this again. Now that you said Mikanu Labam Matame, which means there is no such thing as Tumat Tahom of Zava. So what is that coming to exclude? Should we say that according to Rabbi Yossi, should we go back to Rava now? Because he can't possibly hold like Rav Yosef said. So maybe according to Rabbi Yossi, we'll explain like Rava did, which is, yes, it definitely includes the Kohen, because the only thing it could be excluding is Tumat Sheretz. And Tumat Sheretz, we said, is not relevant to Nazir, because a Nazir can be Mitame Sheretz and bring his korban anyway. And it's not relevant to Pesach because there's an opinion that says Shochtim v'Zorkin al Tmei Sheretz, that even a Tmei Sheretz who doesn't go to the mikvah is allowed to bring the korban Pesach. So we couldn't be saying that's excluded. That seems fine. So Amre is he can say la'olam b'ba'alim u'b'Pesach, and how so? Kasaval ein Shochtim v'Zorkin al Tmei Sheretz. Very simply, he could say Rabbi Yossi holds by the opinion that you can slaughter the korban Pesach for a Tumat Sheretz. And therefore, what is coming to teach you, this comes to teach you is specifically that if someone's tummy Tumat Sheretz, Tumat Tahom, not only Tumat Sheretz would be a problem, if you were mitame to a Sheretz, you can't bring the korban Pesach, But even if you were tamei tumat tahom of a sheretz, where no one even knew there was a sheretz that was there, and you somehow became impure from that, you also can't bring your korban pesach. Okay, so then we answered simply by saying, no, you can't learn from here to the Kohen because there's a way to read Rabbi Yossi and that Braita together. If you say that Rabbi Yossi holds ein shochatim v'zorkiin al tamei sheretz, and then it's talking about the owners. Okay, therefore, there's one last question of Rabbi Yossi before we move on. Ela Rabbi Yossi, as I mentioned before, Zava Gemora hechem ishkachalaf. Every time she goes to the mikveh in the morning, she sees a re'iyah the next day, that day. We view it as something new. Then every day she's a shomeret yom keneged yom. She can never become a zavagdola. Zavagdola is when she sees 3 days straight. Then she has to wait 7 clean days. She'd never get to that because every time she'd see a re'iyah the next day, you'd say, oh, that's something new. So they say no. There's 2 possible ways where you could become a Zavagdola according to him. One is bishofat, if she continually bleeds. You can't go to the mikveh. This was only because she went to the mikveh on the morning of the second day. But if you we're going to come up with 2 cases where she couldn't go to the mikveh in the morning. Why not? So one is she continually bleeds, and then of course she can't go to the mikveh. You can only go to the mikveh if you saw the blood yesterday, and today you haven't yet seen blood, so you can go to the mikveh. The second one, if every day ben hashmashot, which really means, right, if you do it, if you see the blood, you don't have to be bleeding continually, but as long as you're bleeding from when it goes into the next day, okay, meaning that already in the beginning of day number 2, you saw blood, then you can't go to the mikveh that day because you already saw right in the beginning of the day. Then you wouldn't be able to go to the mikveh, and then we would view this all as one continuum. Because again, it's only if she goes to the mikveh in the morning, she hasn't seen yet that day, that we can call this tumat ziva of tehom, okay, that it was unknown that she was going to get it. But if she started her day with blood, then it wasn't an unknown thing, and then it would actually be a problem, and it would, I shouldn't say tumat tehom, but I should say he views this as something new. It's not something new if it continued from one day to the other. Okay, that was all. Okay, now, that was all to try to figure out, could we come to the conclusion that the tumat tahom that we're going to allow for Pesach and Nazir is not only if the owners were tamei tumat tahom by some unknown tumah, or also the Kohen himself. Now they're going to jump from here and ask a question, even though we don't have an answer to the Kohen question because we suggested some possibilities. By Rav Yosef himself, who was the one who said, I don't even think it's talking about a Kohen, but he himself asked the following question. Kohen hamiratzeh b'tamid, and this, by the way, proves that he was really just playing devil's advocate, okay? Because he even suggests here that maybe it is referring to the Kohen. So there he was kind of saying to Rava, your proof isn't great because I could claim something else. But he himself is going to now jump off of the fact that if we say it applies to the Kohen also, would we apply it in a different case? So how does it work? Kohen hamiratzeh b'tamid. What if the Kohen is doing the korban tamid? Hutra lo tumat tahom olo. Let's say the Kohen gadol, any Kohen who's doing the daily sacrifice. And remember, what did we learn? There's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai that tumat tahom is permitted for Pesach and Nazir. Can we apply this also to korban tamid? That's his question. So intim tzalomar Kohen. Now there are no owners in the korban tamid because nobody owns it. It's a public. So therefore, your question is only if you assume it applies to the Kohen, would it apply here as well? So intim tzalomer, if you were to say Kohen, and this is why it's clear that he was just playing devil's advocate with Rava before, because he says if you want to say Kohen amaratzeh b'korbonotehem, okay, whether you read this or not, but this is what it means. It's in parentheses here, but shel nazir v'oseh pesach, that since you say there's this halacha l'Moshe Sinai that was passed down that we know that hutralo tumat tahom, that if we say that applies also to the Kohen, that the Kohen who had tumat tahom and didn't know about it and did the korban anyway, it's going to be okay. Kohen hamiratzeh b'tamid mai. What if he's a Kohen doing the korban tamid? Would it work? Now here are the 2 sides of the question. Mi amrinan ki gemire tumat tahom b'Pesach b'tamid lo gemire. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai came down to us that it's specifically Pesach and Nazir. Maybe that implies and nothing else. O Dilma, Yalev Tamid mi Pesach. Or perhaps we could learn, if it's true for Pesach, we'll learn it also to Korban Tamid. So Amar Rabba answers and says, it's Kal v'chomer. We're going to learn it to the Korban Tamid by a Kal v'chomer. How so? What's our Kal v'chomer? Uma b'makom shelo hutra lo tuma yidua, hutra lo tuma tahom. In Pesach, if you know there's tuma, right? Regular tuma, like you knew there was a dead body under the house and you went into the house anyway. Maybe you didn't, you forgot or something, but you went in anyway, and then you did the korban pesach. Now, let's say you're a Kohen and you did that. Now, if all the Kohanim were Tameim, then we already said Tumah Hutra. But let's say the Tzibor did their korbanot, and there was one korban left, like one group hadn't done their korban, and now all the Kohanim are Tameim from this Tumah Yudua. What will we say? You can't do that because already the Tzibor did the Pesach. Okay, so that's what we would say. Makom shelo hutralo Tumah Yudua. Tumah Yudua is not permitted, right, unless it's the whole community or something like that, or no one's done the Pesach yet. But if it's in some circumstance where that's not the case, then we don't permit a regular tumah. And yet, what do we permit? Hutralo tumat tahom. We do permit tumat tahom. So let's do the comparison to korban tamid. Makom shutralo tumah yidua. Remember, korban tamid b'moado even b'tumah. So if the kohen's tameh, we're going to allow the korban tamid because the korban tamid pushes off tumah, even yidua, even tumah that we know about. Therefore, so logic would state that in that case, since we're less strict with it about the regular tumah, and yet Korban Pesach, where we're more strict, we permit tumat tahom. Of course, we're going to allow tumat tahom in the case of the Korban Tamid. To which they respond and they say, Amre, what are you talking about? And this is a very interesting issue, which is when you have halacha l'moshe misina, that means often we don't even understand halacha l'moshe misina. There's traditions that were passed down. It's they claim it's as early as Moshe, whether it's really as early as Moshe, or it's just saying it's a very strong rabbinic law, right? We have such a strong Masorah about it. Usually everyone's in agreement about it, which, as you know, is not so simple. Most things are not in agreement about. So they say you can't take that. If there's halacha l'moshe misina, it's more like something we don't understand really. And it was said about Pesach and Nazir. You can't say logic would state that we can apply it to somewhere else. So therefore, he says you can't do that. And how do we know you can't do it? Because I'm going to prove it from a Braita. This is a different case. Okay, Rashi, if you want to look into Rashi, he gives you the whole case. But Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva in Masechet Nazir, I'm about 8 lines down in Rashi. There's a question about a Revi dam. Okay, if a Nazir comes in contact with a Revi, we've read the Shiur of a quarter of a log of dam, of blood from a dead body, if he touches it, is he tamei and he has to undo his nizirut, right? Redo it. And Rabbi Akiva says it's a kal v'chomer. He says like this: Ma etzem keseora, the halacha of the size of a bone, the size of a barley, okay, very teeny. Ein mitamei. I'm reading in Rashi. Ein mitamei adam be'ohel. Okay, it doesn't. It's kind of a lighter tumah because it doesn't work in a tent. If you're in a tent or you're on top of it and you walk over a bone that's that teeny, it's not going to be b'tamei. But if you touch it, it will be. And the Nazir Megaleach al Maga'ava al Masa'ah, he does have to shave his hair, meaning he has to redo his whole Nazirut if he touches it. So Revi dam shemitama dam ba'ol. It's got a stricter law because a quarter log of blood will mess you up. If there's a quarter log of blood in a house and you're in that house, right, from a dead body, you're going to be tamei. So eino din shenis. So therefore, logic would state the Nazir Megaleach al Maga'ava al Masa'ah. So now, the whole din of etzem keseora is halacha l'moshe misinai. So now go back to our Gemara. Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer. There's a good case of where the Gemara just quotes you part of it, and without reading the whole thing, you wouldn't understand what they're talking about. Amar lo, thank God for Rashi, right? He makes it easier for us, and he brings us the whole thing, right? If we didn't have Rashi, what you would do is you would look at the little letter Aleph there, which tells you go look in some other sugyot. It appears in Shabbat Lamed Kuf Lamed Bet. It appears in Nazir. Okay, and you would look there, and then you would see the whole issue. So Rabbi Eliezer says to him, Akiva, etzem keseora halacha, revi dam kavachomer, ve'ein danim kavachomer mehalacha. He says to him, you're trying to learn a kavachomer from the din of etzem keseora, but that in and of itself is halacha l'moshe misinai. You can't, remember we've learned before that kavachomer is a weaker type of argument because it's just based on logic. So, which is strong, but not strong enough. And therefore, you can't learn a kavachomer on halacha l'moshe misinai. So here, back to our question. So therefore, how can you possibly learn this kal v'chomer? So he says, fine, let's try something else. Ela amarava. Rava says, Yalif moado mi pesach. Now you learn something different. That Gzera Shava, this is Gzera Shava. We have two words that are the same, that one appears in Tamid, and one appears in the daily sacrifice, and one appears in Pesach. We learned these words before. These were the words that said that Tumah, right, it overrides Tumah. So they say we can learn from one to the other. Since by Pesach it says Moado, and we have this halacha l'Moshe Sinai that says Tumat Tahom is permitted, we assume it's also permitted by the Korban Tamid from the Gzera Shava. Now this is different. Why are we allowed to learn a Gzera Shava to halacha l'Moshe Sinai? That's because the Gzera Shava is something that was passed down also by tradition, and therefore once the Gzera Shava exists, we can apply it across the board, presumably according to our sugya anyway, even to halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Okay, next, Tumat Tahom Gufa Hechaktiva. Now we're finally finding out, okay, where does it talk about Tumat Tahom? And then we're going to see what is Tumat Tahom defined by. Okay, so where do we learn it? So Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amal Ka, we're going to have three opinions here. One is going to prove a pasuk from Nazir. Then we're going to say, well, okay, that's good for Nazir. Where do we know about it by Pesach? And we'll see two different opinions about Pesach. V'chi yamut met alav. This is when the Nazir, it says, Ki yamut alav met Pitom, all of a sudden he ends up becoming Tamedu and Mate, and then everything gets canceled out. What does it mean, alav, on him? Alav, it means it had to have been something that could have been seen by you. Okay, so you could have foreseen it happening. Therefore, if you didn't know, okay, sounds like, and we're going to see this in a minute, sounds like it means as long as you didn't know, then it's Tumat Tahom. Okay, but we'll see. So right now, that's where he learns from. So the Gemara says, Eshkacha Nazir osa Pesach minalan. Okay, so you've resolved for us the Nazir. What about someone who's doing the Korban Pesach? Amar Rabbi Yochanan Amar Cha. It's a little bit of a strange drasha. B'derech rechoka lachem. He's going to learn from the verse that talks about Pesach Sheni, right? When you do Pesach Sheni, it says, Ish ki yatamei lanefesh, if you're tamei on Pesach Rishon, o b'derech rechoka lachem. Now you would have hoped that the word lachem would have been by Tuma, but instead he learns the laws of Tuma from words that appear by the second issue, which is if you're far away. So you could say, because it's next to the Tameh part, so he's going to take it and say, it's a little bit weak. Well, don't worry, because we'll resolve that in a bit. But Rabbi Yochanan says, it says, B'derech rechoka lachem, for you, plural. B'mechuveret lachem, it has to be something that was seen to you and others. So again, Tumat Tahom would be something that you and others couldn't have foreseen. So that wouldn't make you Tameh. B'Shimon ben Lakish Amal kiderech. He darshans the word b'derech rechoka. He says, what's known about a path? A path is something everybody sees. Ma derech bigaloi. Everybody sees the path, the road. So af tuma nami bigaloi. It has to be something that everyone sees. So now, the Gemara brings a braita, meitive, and says, wait a minute. This doesn't make sense. All your answers, now, if we really take them literally, they each come to different conclusions about what Tumat Tahom is. Mechuveret alav means you had to have known about it. So it could be the whole world knows about it and you don't. That's Tumat Tahom. According to the second one, mechuveret lachem, that seems to imply you and others know about it, right? Seems like if, a few people didn't know, but as long as you and others know about it, then it's regular Tumah. And the third seems to imply it has to be seen to everybody. Okay, so we're going to talk about this contradiction in a minute. Meitive. Now we're going to bring a braita, and as I said, this braita also connects with the first braita we saw, the Tanya Rabbi Chia that we started with today, and we're going to see it's going to connect with the braita we're going to bring later. Eventually, we're going to see the entire braita in its entirety. Here it says, Ezehu. This is actually a Tosefta in Zavim. Okay, Ezehu Tumata Tahom. What is Tumata Tahom? Kol shelo ikirba echad besof haolam. It's only Tumat Tahom if not a single person in the world knows about it. Okay, somebody got eaten by a lion. They were out by themselves. They died and they got covered up, and no one ever knew there was a grave there. But hikirba echad besof haolam ain't a Tumat Tahom. If one person in the world knows about it, that's not Tumat Tahom. So now they're going to say that this doesn't match any of the conclusions we came to from those psukim. L'Rabbi Elazar amar b'mechuveret alav adi yadehu. Just he needs to not know about it. But if everyone else in the world can know about it, if you didn't know about it, it's Tumat Tahom. L'Rabbi Yochanan damar lachem b'mechuveret lachem adi yade batchein. It would have to be, if one person knew about it, it would be fine. You would have to have two people knowing about it. They would already take it out from Tumat Tahom because it says lachem. L'Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish damar kiderech adi yade kulei alma. There, the entire world has to know. As long as someone in the world doesn't know about it, that's Tumat Tahom, because it's not Galoi Lakol. Therefore, it doesn't seem to match any of these interpretations. So what do they answer? And this will resolve also our problem with how could they possibly learn it from the Derech Rechoka, which had nothing to do with Tumah. So, Ela Tumat Tahom Hilchata Gemirala. Really, this halacha is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Vikras machta ba'alma, they just connected it to a pasuk, but it's not that they actually learned it from the pasuk. Don't take these drashot literally. Okay, these drashot are just a way of connecting it so that you remember. Usually it's used as a mnemonic device to remember or to strengthen it, but it didn't really, they don't learn it out from the pasuk, and therefore you don't have to worry about the things that don't really fit 100%. Now we're getting back to details of this Tumat Tahom. How does it work? So does it work in any case? If I was Tamei Tumat Tahom and I knew I was, and then I went into the mikdash anyway, am I okay? Or is it only b'di'evet if I already sprinkled the blood? And then I found out that I happened to have been in a place where there was a Tumat Tahom. So Amar Marbar of Ashi comes and limits it. He says, Lo shanu ela, this heter of Tumat Tahom is only sheno dalo la'achar zrika. Just like we had this whole, if you remember our Mishnah has 3 cases. The first case is the meat became impure. And then we said, right, there was this debate about how to read it. Is it only b'di'evet, right, if you already sprinkled the blood? Or then we actually said, no, it could be even if you knew before and you sprinkled the blood. So we're going to have the same discussion here, but not about the meat, right? It's not a repeat because there it was about the meat becoming tamei. Now we're talking about the person being tumat tahom. So he says it's only if you found out after you did the sprinkling of the blood. Because when you sprinkle the blood, you didn't know and you were fine. But no dalo lifnei zrika. But if you knew about it before, lo meratze, it doesn't work. But the Gemara brings a contradiction to this, and on account of that, they're going to change what Marbar of Ashi said. They're going to edit it. So meitive, and here comes the braita. Hamotze meit mushkav lerochbo shel derech. If you're walking on a path and there was a dead body lying horizontally, okay, you're perpendicular to the way you're walking straight, and it's perpendicular. So if it's lerochbo shel derech, right, it covers the width of the path. Litzchuma, and you walked over it. And then you found out there was a dead body there on the path that you walked in. Litruma tamei. When it comes to truma, you're tamei. Linazir v'osa pesach, you're tahor. But for nazir and osa pesach, you're pure. This must be tumat tahom, and that's why you're pure, because nobody knew there was a dead body there. Okay, now. I'm sorry, I skipped down because it repeats itself. Okay, so now what do they learn from here? What does it call you? It says tahol. What does it mean, tahol? It means you're totally pure. B'chol tamei v'tahor lahabahu. When the Mishnah says, or a braita, or whatever source it is, it says you're tamei or you're tahor. That defines your status. It doesn't mean b'di'evet if you did your korban already, it's okay. No, it means you're actually completely pure. You walked on this path. You didn't know there was a kever tahom. If you want to go do your korban pesach, go for it. That sounds like against what Marbar Avashi says. So therefore, they change what he says and they say ali itmar hachi itmar. This is what he said. What he really meant to say was the opposite of what we thought he said. Amar Baravashi, lo tema, don't say no dalo lachar zrika hu demeratze aval no dalo lifnei zrika lo meratze. Don't say it's only b'di'evet if you already sprinkled the blood, but if you found out before, you're not allowed to do the korban. No, ela afilu no dalo lifnei zrika meratze. This whole heter of tumat tahom is a real good heter. It's valid. If you walked over a grave and you didn't know about it, and then you find out later, and it was an unknown grave in general, again, right, that maybe no one ever knew that it was the case, and then somehow they found out that it was. So you're totally fine. You're not considered tamei at all when it comes to the korban pesach or bringing your korban for nazir. Okay, now that we quoted this braita, and now we're going to see the entire thing. Okay, we're going to see the whole in its entirety. It's actually the Tosefta. So now it's a Tosefta in Zavim. This whole thing that's going to kind of bring full circle everything we learned today. Hamotzim meit mushkav lirochbo shel derech. So if you want to go eat truma, it's a problem. Because remember, tumat tahom is only a heter for Pesach and Nazir. It's not a heter for other things. So you're considered tamei when it comes to eating your truma. But now the Tosefta is going to limit this. Okay? Well, it's only she'ein lo makom la'avor. If it's covering the entire path and there was no way you could have walked without walking over it. But when it comes to truma, we're going to be strict only in the case that that's the case. If there's somewhere that you theoretically could have walked, even if it's, let's say, on the side, you're also going to be tahor when it comes to truma. You can eat the truma. Another limitation. It's only if you found the body with all its pieces intact in one piece. But if it was broken up, if the body was chopped up, and then there were spaces in between where you could have theoretically walked, then it's fine. However, right, Shema Bena Prakim Avar, maybe you walked in between. But that's not going to be the case bekever. If it's in a grave, then everything in the grave combines, even if it's in pieces. Okay, very pleasant to think about chopped up dead bodies, right? But that's what they're doing. If it's in a grave, then the whole thing joins together, and therefore any space above the grave that you walk is going to be problematic. And this is classic din ohel. Remember, ohel could be you're in a tent, a covered space, or you cover it yourself. If you walk over something, right? This is why Kohanim can't go into cemeteries, because if they walk over a grave, it's a problem, right? They can be in areas where there are no graves or no trees, because the trees also make a tent over the dead body and create this space. But anyway, that's for another time. Then he says, wait, that's also that you can walk and not worry if they're in pieces. That's b'mahalech b'raglav if you're walking. But ta'un, if you're carrying a big burden, or rachuv, then you're going to be tameh, because the assumption is you have something bigger over you that's going to make a tent over it, or also the animal will also create a tent, and then again you'll become tameh. Because someone who walks, it's potentially possible that you wouldn't touch it. But in those cases, it's not possible that you wouldn't either touch it or end up making a tent over it. Another thing, and this we said from the beginning, because otherwise this wouldn't be possible to explain, this is only in an unknown grave that nobody knew about. But if it was a place that you walked over, that everybody knew there were bodies buried underneath, then you're going to be tameh. We can't use any of these. You can't say this is an exception to the rule. Again, we're going to see the quote that we saw before. Right? As long as one person knows, it's already not a kever tahom. It's only a grave that absolutely not a single person in the world knew that it existed, which, by the way, really limits the case of a tumah tahom. How you would know is a whole separate question, right? How you're going to know that nobody knew that this person was buried, that's a very good question. I assume, if they don't know anyone knew, then that's going to be sufficient for them. Another thing, it has to be hidden. So therefore, if you see it buried under things that are opaque, that you couldn't see, under dirt, under rocks, under teven, forgot the word for teven, I don't know, hay, right, or something like that, where it covers it, fodder, I think it is, then that's tumat tahom. But if it was covered with water, or it was in the dark and you didn't see it because it was dark out, but in the light you could have seen it, or nikikas la'im, in the cracks of the rocks, in other words, if there was a way you could have seen it, then ein zeh tumat tahom. V'lo amru tumat tahom, we end where we started. Here's the quote they quoted earlier, which is, and that's why they said, if you remember, Tane Rabbi Chia, remember Rabbi Chia wrote the Tosefta, right? So here you see it. This is from the Tosefta, and it's Rabbi Chia. So they didn't say tumat tahom, ela lemeit bilvad, and that was to exclude, right, either tumat sheret or maybe tumat tahom of ziva. Okay, we're going to end with this Mishnah because I wanted to end on a kind of fun note, because it wasn't the easiest or most fascinating daf. Nitma shalem orubo. So the Mishnah starts off and says, it's a new topic, but let's learn it anyway. So nitma shalem orubo. What if your korban pesach in its entirety or the majority of it becomes tameh? Sorfino to lifnei abira me'atzei ha'maracha. You don't burn it in Jerusalem. You have to burn it in the temple area. The birah is the area of the Beit HaMikdash, using the wood from the altar itself. The atzei ha'maracha is where they took the fire for the altar. You have to use it from there, which means that you use the wood from the temple. Nitma mi'uto. What if you only a small piece of your meat became tameh, or hanotav, or you left it over and you didn't eat it in the time that night you were supposed to eat it? You do it in your courtyards or on your roofs from your own wood. Obviously only in Jerusalem, because you can't take the meat out of Jerusalem, but you would burn it with your own stuff. So here comes the Mishnah. It says, Hatzai kanim. The people who were stingy and didn't want to use their own wood, what would they do? They would go to the temple because they wanted to use the temple wood. They didn't want to waste their own wood on this. So they would say, oh, let's burn it in the temple. And you might say, okay, fine. What's the big deal? But look at the Gemara. The Gemara starts off and says, my timer, what's the reason why nitma shalem urubo, you have to do it in the temple? So Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, kedei levaishan, in order to embarrass them. In other words, they wanted to if someone really got the korban pesach meat all tameh, the majority, or right, if you get a little or you forget to eat all the meat, okay, if you get the whole piece of meat, tameh, like it's crazy you did that. And they want to humiliate you in front of everybody else. So everyone's there at the temple and you have to start burning, right? Everyone's roasting their meat in the spit, and, and you're going and burning it, like you ruined your thing. It's a huge embarrassment. Why is this so interesting? It's interesting because what the Mishnah ends with this case about how people would go to the temple specifically to embarrass and specifically to save money. And what do you see here? You see that to some people, they don't care to be humiliated in public as long as they save money, right? Like those people aren't really concerned about their image and they don't really care. So they're okay to go and mooch off of the temple wood. But other people, right, would be humiliated by this. So it's interesting that you have this issue, and I see someone's asking in the chat, what, isn't it terrible to embarrass people? So again, there's embarrass and there's ways of trying to discourage this from happening. So they make you burn it there. Obviously, the person who's stingy, like they have a choice. They don't have to burn it there, but if they want to, they're allowed to. But again, they have to suffer some humiliation also if they do that. So it's kind of poking a little bit of, like, what do you don't care, all you care about is money, you don't care about embarrassing yourself. So there's some interesting food for thought here about people and human behavior, and that's always, interesting elements of the Gemara. So we'll stop here for today. Have a great day, everyone.